Welcome to our workshop on how to write and communicate science. So let's jump into it. Imagine you're having a long day. You're so hungry and you finally get to a restaurant and you feel it in your heart that, oh my God, now I'm going to eat good food. You enter in the restaurant, they hand to you a menu. Oh my God, it's 50 pages and without even any single picture. And their food is written in a very difficult, using difficult scientific words for the chefs. And you're not even able to tell which is chicken, which is beef, and which is pork. And you can imagine how hard that situation is. Some people may end up not eating because they are not sure they are Seventh-day members, church members, and they don't take pork and they're scared that they might order pork. This is the very same thing that us conservationists do. The community is very hungry to hear from us. And we save them papers that are complicated and the ingredients are not well cited for them to understand and trust. This workshop will help us understand how we can properly write a paper and communicate conservation to the community. All right, so our first speaker today is Dr. Samantha Sitori. Dr. Samantha holds a doctorate in environmental sciences, and I have personally known Dr. Samantha for 4 years now. During our first meeting, we were asked, what do you bring to the table? And Samantha said, I write, I know how to write and present. Since that day, we call Dr. Samantha the stage beast. And with that, Madam Dr. Stage Beast, we are so excited to have you today talk to us through how to write scientific papers. And Samantha, welcome to the screen.
Thank you so much. So, sorry, that really made me laugh. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'll just start off by sharing my screen and also just thanking you all for joining us. Thank you so much for coming and just being part of this process. As Sela mentioned, it's very important to have, I think, insights into communicating our work clearly enough for different types of audiences to hear what we have to say, especially within the environmental field. There's so much that we have to share as environmental practitioners, researchers, academics, you name it. We have so much that we need to share. And it's important that we understand the art of storytelling. And my co-speaker and I today, I think we're trying to take you through that process. And I will do my part in terms of understanding what how to storytell within the research sphere or aspect. Because most of you, I understand, are students here. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Thank you so much for the introduction. As she mentioned, I hold a PhD, so I know a little bit about doing research, just a little bit. And I'm a published author. I mean, I've published in different academic journals. I've published in books, and also published in newspapers, and also spoken to different forms of media around various topics in the environmental sector, including the impact that zoos have on communities, the way zoos represent local communities, that impact on those who visit, including youth engagement in conservation spaces and the like. So I've been writing for some time, and I think I still have a lot to learn, but I'm here to teach you what I know, and hopefully this might help you as well. So today we'll be going through research as storytelling, communicating ideas clearly. So my goal really today is to help you think through your ideas in order to communicate your ideas clearly when we're talking about storytelling. And I want to just say, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. If you have any questions, this is supposed to be a workshop, so we're supposed to be engaging with each other. So you have to ask questions, guys, because as we go along, I don't mind if you raise your hand and you have a question. Sela can let me know if there's someone who has a question about something specific as we're going along, because it's a workshop. We're supposed to be working with each other. So yes, let's begin. So as I said, research 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 is about working through your ideas within the academic context. And as we're working through the university system, a lot of you here are within your first, second, or third years in university, and you're probably going through the process of writing assignments, essays for different courses, etc. And so, what we're talking about today is not that far removed from what you're already doing. But I want to make sure we hone in some of those skills and some of those important aspects of doing research, so that we understand what's really what's at the root of what we're doing. So I like to think of research as a form of storytelling. So what story are you trying to tell your reader? So number one, you have to know who your audience is. So in the academic space, and since we're speaking about research in science or in the scientific space, we have to understand that our audience in many cases is usually an academic audience, or an audience that um, is a practitioner in the field, so they have some form of understanding of the issues. And even if they don't, the language that we use should articulate, or should speak to the type of audience that we're writing for. And within the academic space, that audience is usually researchers, academics of different kinds, people who work in the NGO spaces. Oftentimes, it's government officials, politicians who need to read policy documents, etc., depending on what stage you are and who you're publishing for, etc. So, number one, research papers tell a story using evidence. So, when we're telling our story, what story are we trying to tell? How are we trying to tell these stories? So in storytelling, you like Sela did so beautifully. She started off a story about going to a restaurant and you having different types of meat within on your plate, etc. And explaining what you have in front of you or what's on the menu is a form of storytelling. So for instance, um, you really have to think about, okay, if I'm speaking to a 5-year old, I'm going to speak about that plate of meat differently than I'm going to speak to someone who's a restaurateur. So meaning someone who goes to various restaurants all the time. So one person you'll be saying, "Oh yeah, that's chicken, that's beef, that's pork," but to another person you'll be like, "Okay, yes, this is a sirloin steak and it's medium to well done." Already you're explaining the same topic but in a different way. So number one, you have to know your audience, and two, you have to use the research, the storytelling based off of evidence. So the evidence normally, I think when you're writing papers, especially, you're encouraged to use different forms of literature, different forms of books, newspaper articles, if you're using media. You use journal articles and different types of papers and data in order to create a story, to create the story that you're trying to tell. And because again, it's an academic writing, it becomes, you use formal language. So we'll just get into a bit of that. But once you've now known that when you're doing research, you're telling a story, right? You're telling a story. So if we're going back to Sarah's example of meat, you're trying to tell a story in the academics. For instance, with academic language, you you wouldn't be like, "Hey, Chomi, we're going to eat braai meat by the side of the street." You can't use informal language. You have to formalize your language to speak to that audience. And you say, for example, and I'm not saying you should say it like this, but I'm going off the cuff here because I'm going using Sela's example. You'd be saying, the morning, no. You say at the beginning of the week, my friends and I decided to go to a restaurant near the central business district in order to try various types of meat. So already it's just an example of how the language has changed depending on the audience. And because of that, once you've identified your audience, you look at the problem of what you're trying to tell. So every story has sort of a root. What the root in academic writing is the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And with that problem, you then investigate. And that's the part of research that you then do with regards to, like, for instance, what type of literature you use, what type of articles you use, books, etc. And then you go into, for example, your findings. So once you've used the different types of literature, etc., you've gone to the restaurant, you've seen the types of meat. Now you tell your audience, you tell your reader what type of meat you found, and you use the type of language that's needed within that paper. And then the meaning aspect here, that's written meaning here, is now you're making meaning out of what you found, out of what the literature has said, and out of your experience tasting the meat, for example. So how the meat tasted, did you like it? Is it good meat? Where did they find the meat? Where did they source it? Is it from a farm? Was it frozen? Things like that. Just understanding the context of the type of meat that you're eating. So in a nutshell, you're telling a story. And I know it might seem like a lot as I'm speaking, but we're going to get to it. So as I've mentioned, what do you want the reader to know? That's the number one question. What do you want your reader to know? And from answering that question, you then start to build your story. You then start to build the various types of the structure of your research paper, basically. And I love this picture. I took it on a road trip once. It's basically a journey. We were taking a journey here to the southeast side of Zimbabwe. And I like to think of it as a journey. Your paper is a journey. Your essay is a journey. So what does the journey entail? As you can see, we have a road, we have views, we can see mountains, some houses, we can see another car in front. But you as the driver, where are you taking us, the passengers in that car? What is your story saying? So that's why there's structure to scientific papers or essays. There's always a structure. The basic structure of a paper or an essay is an introduction, the basic introduction, body, conclusion. That's the structure of an essay, basic structure. So if you're looking at the basic structure of the essay, you see that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But if we're talking about writing or storytelling in scientific papers, there's more to it. There's more that goes into the structure. So I'd like you to think of it as a hamburger. There's the top bun, there's your lettuce, your cheese if you want, your onions, your tomatoes. There's the actual meat patty, the part of the burger that has the meat, the actual burger. And then on the bottom bun, you can have your mayonnaise sauce, your burger sauce, whatever. And then it makes a full burger so that when you eat it, you're tasting all the flavors, the fullness of everything that you're having. The fullness of everything you're having. The fullness of everything you're having. And that allows you to sort of see that the structure should have also coherence. The structure in itself should fit together perfectly. So your paper will have a title, it'll have an abstract, it'll have an introduction, a literature review, a method section, findings, meaning the data that you have collected, what is your data saying, a discussion section, and a conclusion. And lastly, your reference list or your bibliography. And all of these aspects must be included in your research paper. And I'm sure as you've been writing assignments, you've been seeing your lecturer saying, hey, your introduction is not clear, or where are your findings, or what methods did you use? Because you have to understand these various aspects of your paper to make sense so that the reader can make sense of what you're saying. And you have to follow a structure when you're writing. So think about the burger again, the hamburger, that if you eat the bun by itself, is not a burger. You're eating bread. If you eat the lettuce by itself with the tomatoes and the onions, it's not a burger, it's a salad. It's something else. If you eat the meat by itself, you're eating meat. It's not a burger. But when it's together, when it's one, some people call them sandwiches, but when it's a burger like this, you call it a hamburger. So when you have all these aspects, the different aspects of your article, of your paper that are listed here, it becomes a full scientific paper. You're bringing in every aspect that is needed to make the journey smooth, clear for your passengers. meaning your readers. Because if you're missing any part of these aspects, one, it'll be incomplete. Because remember, as I said in the beginning, in order for it to be a research paper in research story, in research storytelling, it has to be evidence-based. So your introduction speaks to what is the problem that you're trying to address. What is the problem that you're trying to address? And in order to bring that, I'm not going to go too much into detail with each of these aspects because I have a few more things I need to get to. But just so you understand, in your introduction, what is the problem you're trying to address? You have to bring into context what problem you're trying to address. So, for example, if we're talking about the meat again, right? The problem, let's say, is that the meat at Stella's restaurant is too salty. That is the problem. The meat is too salty. So now you're going there to investigate, okay, why is the meat too salty, right? Your introduction should now bring into context. Why, who is Stella? Where's her restaurant? It's in Malawi. Do they like salt? Maybe previous authors have gone to Stella's restaurant and said, you know what? Stella loves salt. And you know, in Malawi, they have a culture that they like to add different types of salt, coarse salt, sea salt, mountain salt, and it makes the meat taste better. So now you're bringing into context, what is it that, you know, is so special about this meat, but why do people say it's salty? And for you, you're now investigating, you're bringing into the reader into context. So that's your introduction. Your literature review is saying, what do we already know? So you're already saying what other authors have said about this specific topic. And in the environmental sciences, there are various avenues that you can take. If you're looking at conservation specifically, there's critical conservation. There's conservation that's based off of quantitative methods or ecological data. There's water conservation. There's climate change. There's so many aspects. So you have to know exactly what it is that your paper is trying to say, and that's rooted in the problem. Your introduction speaks to the problem. And once you've identified the problem, you've given the context, your literature reviews now says what has been said on this topic before. And that takes you to the methods. Your methodology is very important because it's the how. It's saying what you did or what did you do? How did you collect this data? Your methods are very important because they need to be replicable, meaning other people who decide to also do the same research of going to Stella's kitchen should be able to replicate the methods that you did. So if I go there and I look at your paper and it says you went there by bus, you sat and talked to Stella for 10 hours, you tasted all her meats, you looked at the types of salt, you looked at who manufactured them, I should be able to go and do the same thing that you did. Obviously, there are challenges, etc. You have to outline those. There are ethical issues, especially in conservation. When you're dealing, for example, with communities, which is what I did. I worked with communities within the Kruger that's neighbor the Kruger National Park in South Africa. When I worked with those communities, you have to understand the ethical issues surrounding your forms of data collection. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say about methods because there's also different types of methodologies between quantitative methodologies and qualitative methodologies, which I cannot go into. But I focus primarily on qualitative. Qualitative meaning I did face-to-face interviews. I used case studies. So my case studies were ones that I actually went into. I used the Kruger National Park and I went into the communities to do face-to-face interviews, participant observation, surveys, very semi-structured surveys that I used to understand the situation of the people living next to a protected area. And being able to do that was part of the qualitative process. But I had to outline that in my research paper so that people would understand how I collected my data, who I spoke to, and what the context was. So you're giving life to the context, but you're also giving breath to the how of everything. And your findings are those, we regard them as empirical chapters. Your findings are the chapter, or is the chapter or the section of your paper that speaks to the data you've collected. So what data do you have? And there are also different ways of speaking to your findings. There, yeah. So I'm trying to find a way to break it down. But your findings, you need to report back your findings to your audience, to say, okay, this is how I went to Malawi, this is how I did my data collection with your methods, and this is what I found. And when you speak to what you found, oftentimes, depending on the type of methods you've used, your findings will be speaking directly to what your respondents or your participants of your research have said. So for me, because I was working with people, I would use direct quotes in my findings to speak back, to give voice to my participants. So I would use a lot of direct quotes, and I would use descriptive language to paint a picture of what I found, so that my readers could understand my data in a narrative way. So it's called the narrative approach. Basically narrating what your participants have said in order to give them voice. And this is part of the ethnographic data, or form of reporting back data. It's called ethnographic methodologies. But again, I'm trying to simplify this. I'm just giving you examples of how I conducted my methods and how I reported back on my data. And your discussion section is, why does this matter? So now you found this information, you have your data, and now you're saying, why does this matter? This is your analysis. I think this is the most important part of your essay, because it shows your critical thinking skills. So now you go back to your introduction, you say, what was my research question? What did I ask? What was the problem? And then, okay, now you're discussing that. You're saying, okay, I said the meat at Sella's restaurant has different types of salt. It's salty. So, but what did I find? And what did I think about what I found based off of what other people have written and what I found? So you're analyzing your data using literature and other forms of evidence. And this is the most important, because it shows how critical your critical thinking abilities. And when in an exam situation, I believe that they mark you this section has the highest marks, because it shows your critical thinking abilities. And your examiner wants to see that you can think for yourself. You've read this, but what do you think at the end of the day? What are you drawing? What is your data saying? What are you drawing from this? And obviously your conclusion then summarizes everything, the key points or the key takeaways from what you've written. And just quickly to go back to the introduction, your paper should have a thesis statement. Your paper should have a thesis statement. So when you've outlined your problem, what is your thesis statement? Your thesis statement basically says what you're arguing. So what you're arguing sets the tone for your paper. So again, the problem was people said Sella's meat is too salty. So the thesis statement is, you argue that the meat was too salty, or the meat is too salty. And then you say how you're going to argue that. So this is important. So I've just taken you through the structure of the paper. And I had to stay there for a bit so that you'd really understand the crux of writing a paper. And the most important thing, obviously, I mean, everything is important, but really, when you're going when you're starting the process of thinking through, okay, I'm going to tell my story, about elephant culling in Botswana, or I'm going to tell my story about rainforest degradation in wherever you are. It's about choosing the topic. What are you passionate about? What are you wanting to write about? And this is important because I think it'll show in your paper when you enjoy your topic. It shows when we're marking papers, we can tell this one didn't like their topic. We can tell. It's so obvious because the lack of passion, I don't know how to put it into words, but it shows. So I know sometimes some of your assignments are forced on you because you have to do it for your degree. But find something interesting in what you're writing so that it brings out the passion as you write. It's so important. And I like to call this the funnel effect. So it's basically what you see pictured here. The funnel effect is when you choose a topic, or when you start writing about your topic, you start broad. So if you're writing about, for example, I enjoy wetlands, the topic of wetlands. So you'd speak about the problem. Climate change is becoming a problem. It's causing rainfall, intermittent rainfall patterns across the world, and this is affecting rainwater storage in a multiple places, and this affects the health of wetlands. For example, that's my introduction. But you see, I've went from climate change and I've narrowed the focus to wetlands, because what I'm really talking about is wetlands. But I'm showing that the problem is linked to something broader like climate change. And then I speak and I narrow down the focus, even more focused to the role of wetlands in Harare, which is in Zimbabwe. So already my focus is now on a case study. It's wetlands in Harare, right? But I've already shown there's a nice coherent line there. You see, from climate change to wetlands to role of wetlands in Harare. So I'm now turning it into a research question because I've already told the reader we're now speaking about wetlands in Harare. So my question would then be, how do wetlands contribute to urban water regulation in Harare? Now I'm thinking about the problem, which is climate change. We're seeing that there's intermittent rainfall. Rainfall is becoming less and less. The wetlands are no longer being rejuvenated as quickly as before. The groundwater storage is affected. So how does this affect water regulation, urban water regulation in Harare? Is that clear, the way the funnel is working? You narrow your focus from a broader issue. But it starts with the problem again. And that's why passion is important when you're writing papers, because you have to be passionate, or at least interested, at the very least, interested in what you're writing about. It brings that salt that we've been talking about, those spices. You add that raja curry, the paprika, garlic, some rosemary. Otherwise, it's bland. And you don't want a bland paper. Your examiner will know this one did not enjoy their paper, because you're writing, you cannot fake it. And if you use, oh, I should have said this. If you use Chat GPT, guys, AI is good it's like makeup. You can't lie about who you are. Makeup is only an enhancer of beauty. It doesn't cover everything. You are beautiful the way you are. So show your beauty. Huh? You don't have to use ChatGPT as your primary form of essay writing, because you will fail. And now they're AI detectors. So don't do it, guys. AI is just meant to maybe help you think through something, but it's not supposed to write your paper. You will fail. And AI makes us lazy. Again, remember what I said about critical thinking. You have to think for yourself. Sorry, I had to say that. And then we go back to securing a strong topic. So this is about wetlands in Harare. This is a group of young people I worked with, and we were walking through a wetland in Harare called Monavale. So, and I'm passionate about wetlands. As you can see, I was in the wetlands. So good topics are clear, they're specific, and they're descriptive. You're describing, you're giving context, you're showing the problem, you're showing the issues, you're showing what other people have said, and you're also, it comes from a place of interest. And that's why, for me, passion is important in storytelling, because your energy will show in the paper. In addition, what story what story are you telling to your audience, and what is the problem? To ask you a question like, what story can you tell from this image? What problem can you derive, even if you're just thinking off the bat? Like, what story can you tell? It's important to think through these things in your writing, so that one, you're coherent. Two, you're taking your reader through a journey. You have a start, a middle, and an end. Three, your story is making sense. So the coherence part is very important. Your burger must be fulfilled. It must have all the trimmings, so that the person reading can understand and can enjoy what you're writing. I hope you're understanding where I'm going with this. But basically, here the story that I would be telling is, They're young people who are passionate about the environment and who are having fun as they're walking through a wetland, basically, a wetland. And so once you've identified this topic, you then ask yourself, what topic interests me? What problems or issues do I want to understand better? These are basically things I've already said. And your research question, which is in the introduction, must be clear, specific, and researchable. So don't choose topics that, one, you are not easily able to research, ones that will be difficult for you to find information. And because you have to be able to write about the topic that you've chosen. And that's very important. And writing in the environmental science, like I said before, is fun because there are a lot of things that you can write about. There are a lot of issues that are affecting our planet, our people, that need attention. So there are a lot of real world challenges between the relationship of people and ecosystems. So here I just outlined some: understanding environmental processes, examining human environmental interactions, analyzing environmental change and impacts, etc. And you should be able to find common research areas that interest you and that you're passionate about, but also that you'd be able to research about. If you're going to also do field-based research or anything that needs you to collect data, it should also be in something that you're able to actually conduct the data collection. And that requires funding, access, and so many other things. But you have to think through this process. And this part was important, but it's usually the last part of writing a paper. This is actually the last thing I do when I'm writing a paper, which is writing an abstract. Because you finish writing the paper, and basically you have to summarize or rather not summarize, but you have to say what has the paper done, or what is the paper doing. So you have to answer 4 questions. What is the topic? What did you study? What did you find? And why does it matter? The importance. And this should be in your abstract. And it should be between 150 and 250 words. Most papers, or rather most journal articles that ask you to write abstracts, they usually don't go above 250 words, maximum 250 words. And the most important part of writing, or not the most important, I keep saying most important, but this is an important part as well, is referencing. So as soon as I'm done talking, I'm going to add in the chat the UCT referencing guide, which I use throughout my academic career for writing. It's really comprehensive in terms of the different types of referencing styles that are there. As you can see, here's the contents page, and it really helped me in securing how I write and how I reference. Because referencing is very important. If an idea is not your own, you have to reference it. And it doesn't mean copy and pasting what you found in an article and putting it in your essay or your paper, because that's called plagiarism. So if the idea is not your own, you have to reference. You reference by paraphrasing and direct quoting. If you're direct quote, you put it in parentheses, meaning those double quotation marks at the beginning and at the end. And then I have examples, but then you have to show where the reference is coming from and who referenced it and what year, etc. So I understand that the main form of referencing that's used by the majority of the students here today is APA referencing style. And in the referencing guide, the APA referencing style is talked about on page 10. So if you just want to go straight there, once I send it to you, feel free so that you can understand. So here's an excerpt from the referencing guide. And the APA is very similar to Harvard referencing. They have just minor differences. But as you can see, the in-text references, after, say, you've paraphrased. So the difference between paraphrasing and direct quoting is that paraphrasing is you're sort of summarizing what the person has said. You're saying it differently. You're not taking the quote directly. That's direct quoting. So when you do that, for example, here, you use brackets. You put the surname of the author, in this case, it's Harris, and the year, comma, the year, and then you close bracket. And then if you're direct quoting, meaning if Harrison said wetlands in Harare are degraded, and he said that directly in his paper, you have to say Harris, 1999, P for page 10. So you got it from page 10, and that's how you reference direct quotes. This is very important because when you put your paper into Turnitin or another referencing database where they check your referencing percentage, it'll flag these. It'll flag. So your whole paper cannot be made of direct quotes. You have to paraphrase. And you have to find different ways of saying what the authors have said. And I think that's where the art of writing then comes in. Because once you learn to write and you keep writing, you learn to communicate these ideas more clearly as you go along. And in the reference list, it's pretty clear and standard in the referencing guide. So I don't want to go too much into the specifics because the referencing guide really covers this. And I'll paste the copy of it in the chat. Also, if you don't have time to go through the chat to find it, you can find it on UCT referencing guide. You just Google that and it pops up. It's UCT Humanities Referencing Guide and it pops up. It's free. It's absolutely free. But as you can see, here's an example of how it looks like in the reference list, where you start with the author's name and initial, the year it was published, which is 1999, the title of the paper, which is then italicized, and then where the paper was published. Or I think this is a book chapter. So where the book was published and who the publisher is, and then close. But the referencing guide explains this perfectly. But I had to put it up here so that you have a visual idea of how to do it. And there are other referencing styles, including Chicago and Harvard. And they sort of work similarly, although Chicago is a bit different. But again, it's in the Harvard referencing guide. It's in the UCT referencing guide, sorry, where unlike the APA and the Harvard, Chicago uses footnotes. So if you're doing... So, for example, if you're referencing someone, for example, here they use Castells, you use the footnote after the sentence, and the footnote appears at the bottom of your page. And then once it appears at the bottom of your page, that's where you then put the full reference, as you can see here. But it comes in as a footnote. And these are just different types of referencing styles that I'm just showing you. But I was told that you guys use APA, which is very close to Harvard, where again, like similar to APA, Harvard also, in the in-text referencing, when it's paraphrased, you use the author's surname, comma, the year it was published. And then if you're using a direct quote, you use the author's surname again, the year, and then this time you use the colons and then the page number. So you don't put P, you use the colons. So those are the minor differences between Harvard and APA. But you need to know the difference because you need to be consistent with your referencing. You can't start with APA, move to Chicago, and then go to Harvard. Your reader will be like, "Hey, bo, this person is confused." And you don't want to look confused. Remember, you're the one driving. We don't want you going into oncoming traffic or going through potholes. Keep your car straight. Mm-hmm. And then in the referencing list, it's also similar to APA, but I don't want to take too much time on this. So that's why the referencing guide will be provided in the chat. And it's very comprehensive. And now just to summarize everything we've spoken about. So we've spoken about storytelling. We've spoken about identifying the problem, choosing a topic. We've spoken about the structure that you see here in front of you. So I just put this slide here to remind you of the structure of a scientific paper. Your beginning, your middle, and your end. It's so important that you follow the structure. Because if you start with your findings, your reader will be like, "Hey, bo, what's going on here? Why are they talking about their data when they haven't even introduced the topic?" You see? Because you can't fly to your findings. You're driving, remember? So it's a journey. So just to reaffirm, you summarize the key points of the paper in the abstract. And usually the abstract is what you write last after you've written your whole paper, because your abstract has also structures like what do you want the readers to know? Just a second. What is the topic? What did you study? what did you find, and why does it matter? Going into your introduction, you introduce your topic, your research questions, your thesis statement, and remember, you have to highlight what the problem is. Your literature review, overview of those key concepts in literature that speak to what has already been done or said about your topic. Then you outline how the research was conducted or what you did. Your findings is the empirical chapter, which shows the key data and findings. Your discussion, you're analyzing your data using key literature and also using your critical thinking. So what is your data actually saying? And your conclusion reaffirms the questions and summarizes the key points and takeaways. And your reference list, again, when you reference, uniform. If you're using APA, use APA even in the reference list. And it must be in alphabetical order. And so choose a topic that's clear. Turn it into a research question. Follow the clear structure. Reference your sources properly, because if you don't, it's plagiarism. And I believe plagiarism is a punishable crime because you're plagiarizing work that is not your own. And you also want to give respect to those people who've written those papers. It takes a lot. You'll see when you start writing your own papers, it takes a lot to publish a paper. And you want to honor the work that they've done. And sometimes you're even criticizing the work that they've done. But in any case, that's what research is about. That's what storytelling is about. And lastly, write the abstract last. That's my suggestion, that you write it last, because it tells the story of your whole paper in 250 words or less. All right, that's it for me. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, I want to ask Dr. Samantha, how long does it usually take to write a research paper? Like from the start to the beginning, the abstract, the introduction, how long is the process?
Oh, thank you for that question. That's a great question, Retabile. It's so good to hear from you again. It depends who your audience is. So if you're writing for a journal article, and you have your data already, so you've collected your data and now you're just writing. For me, it takes roughly, I would say, about 2 weeks to write a full paper, but with editing, maybe a month. And again, if you're writing with other people, it takes a bit longer because it takes time for people to contribute or to edit, to write their sections. So it really depends on the context of the paper. But once you already have your data, or maybe let me speak from a thesis point of view. My master's thesis, it took me, say 6 months. Hey, no, I lie. It took me about 4 months to write the full thesis without corrections. I just wrote. And then after the corrections, all of that, it took maybe I'd say in total, maybe 6 to 7 months to write and finish. And then it went to the editor, then I had to edit. My PhD thesis, that one. Okay, let's say 9 to 10 months of full writing. And mind you, I was not sleeping. I was not sleeping. I'd wake up, write, sleep, wake up, write, sleep, wake up, write. And with the editing, etc. Yeah. So it depends. But if you're writing a scientific paper with other authors, it takes longer because there's contributions, etc.
Samantha, you brave. That's all what I can say. Well done. Sorry, I logged on a little bit late. I was otherwise occupied, very occupied. It's a skill. Writing is a skill. It's an art. Some get it much quicker than others, but I'm so happy to see that you guys presented this today. I took 18 months to write up my thesis because all my data was in Zulu. So, so you had an easier one. I had all the grade 3s, 7s, and 8s times 2. I did a before and after questionnaire. So to write up all of that and to sift through all of that data was a little bit of a nightmare. But if you have got the ability to sit down and just write, that's brilliant. But if you've got to work and write, it tends to disrupt your chain of thoughts. And you've got to keep going back And sometimes you find you're starting to repeat yourself. So when you do write something, try and get away from work and just knuckle down without interruptions, because as you tend to lose the whole crux of the whole paper. So get your skeleton ready and try and just put your points in there. And of course, make sure when you do start doing your literature research or your literature review, make sure you do it perfect from scratch. Pen and paper also works very well, because then you can keep track exactly which page numbers you are using, and then also in your thesis. So not just the page numbers of the articles that you are using, but also the page numbers of your thesis. So you can go back to where you referenced exactly. I mean, you can type in the reference perfectly and it'll throw it out, but you do tend to lose a little bit of that. So the best thing is to get paper and to write everything down as you move, and just keep track and just keep your concentration going. So if you can't get time out of work, then take leave. Sorry, you just need to knuckle down and just go for it, because you don't want to be interrupted. Even in the office, you busy typing up something, or you're halfway through a paper, you're halfway reading through a paper, and there's knocks on the door. What happens? You have to start from scratch. And I'm sure, Emily, you know that. That's a bit scary. It is scary to write up a paper and to do certain things like that. But keep track, and well done, Samantha. I'm very proud of everybody, and thank you, Samantha. You've come a long way, and I know it's sweat and tears, and it's a big learning curve. And that's all I want to tell my students, and Richard, your students as well. Just don't give up. No matter how tough research gets, you get tougher. And read. And try and get more than one author that has got the same frame of thought. Because some people say, but is it just this guy that thinks that, or this author that thinks this? But try and get at least 3 that's got the same kind of thought, because that can just verify all the information if you're on the right track.
So Dr. Richard, you can unmute and go for it.
Thank you, Sela, and many thanks to Samantha for the presentation. I think it was quite a very useful presentation, complementing to what I've taught my students. I just want to highlight a few things that I learned from the presentation. The storytelling approach, because when you are storytelling, you have to have a voice, and writers develop their styles of storytelling. So I think she mentioned a very good point that you cannot develop that storytelling abilities if you're going to rely on AI. It's not possible. And AI is just an average of voices, storytellers, or stories that have been told. And then she highlighted the problem, that the introduction should be centered around a problem, and that the problem or the research problem is the root, the anchor of your thesis. So I want my students, I'm just saying you should note these key points that I'm highlighting from Samantha's talk. She also talked about different parts of a burger. And by that, she was highlighting that the piece of writing should be coherent. The paragraphs should be coherent, should link to each other. And then she touched on ethical issues, issues of plagiarism. I think those things we have covered them in class. So thank you very much, Samantha. And you also talked about the topic, that it has to be realistic. It has to be something within your passion, within your liking, because writing takes energy and you need passion to go through to the end at a good pace. So I just asked my class if they had comment or questions. They don't. Okay, so there's one question. Thank you so much, Samantha. Those are my few remarks, my few responses to your beautiful talk. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think what Samantha really did was give us a good overview of how we could properly write our research articles, because majority of us are going to branch into different areas and different workplaces, and we obviously need to start learning how to create research articles, proper research articles right now. We may want to go into PhDs and all that. So thank you for giving us such a good foundation while we're still in year 2. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your beautiful comments. I've also been reading them in the comment section. But it's really like Cheryl and Dr. Richard said, Dr. Cheryl and Dr. Richard said, it's a passion, and writing is an art. It's a skill that you develop over time, and it just gets better and better as you go. And as Dr. Richard said, you get your voice as you keep writing, and you start to really learn, I think, the art of showing your voice in your work as you go along. And the sooner you learn this skill, especially in academic writing, the better it is for you, especially around referencing, because you will be marked down, unfortunately, if you do not reference correctly. And if your essay or article is not coherent, it can be rejected by journal articles or whatever it is that you're trying to publish. And if you're going master's, PhD, the examiners are not trying to now fight with your grammar or fight with the fact that your essay is not making sense. You know what I'm saying? You already have to be clear and coherent from the beginning. They're now trying to find your voice and your critical thinking abilities in your work. So the sooner you learn how to write and you hone in that skill, like you go to the gym, you're pushing that muscle so that you have a good bicep there. It's the same thing. You have to practice. Practice makes perfect. Or practice makes better. I don't know if there's anyone who's perfect, but you'll definitely grow in your writing. So keep writing, keep practicing, and write with topics that interest you. Again, there are different audiences, so maybe you might not be writing for academic audiences, but if you write, you're able to communicate better, and you're able to communicate to various people. And what Stella said at the beginning, you have to be able to communicate to the people that your audience are. So if you're writing to communities, write in ways the communities will understand. Don't use flowery language. Just write in the ways that they will understand, so that they can understand your story or the message that you're trying to convey. Thank you guys so much.
Stella, please allow me to just quickly make my comment.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samantha. I mean, I'm watching you guys. I know I don't even remember how I landed to this forum, but it's just timely. But I just wanted to talk about the topic and the usefulness of maintaining a topic or changing a topic if it is not what one is comfortable with. Because I am writing for my PhD, and it is eating my mind every day to change the word, to change the question, to change this, to change that. So I appreciate the storytelling mode, Samantha Okari, a lot of things of what you have just highlighted. But I just wanted to just find out quickly, should I have started writing? I'm speaking for students that I work with, or people who are beginning their writing. I have gone so much ahead, invested a lot of energy in a topic I was writing, and midway I realized, wait a minute, I am not doing it right. Do I have an opportunity to turn this around to something else totally? Or do I just play around with my topic until I get it right? I'm belling in from Kenya.
So, Bridget, this is something you should definitely talk about with your supervisor, since it's a PhD topic. But I would suggest that go back to your data. If you're seeing that your data is no longer speaking to your research question, then it already says something about your topic, and I mean your research question. And that's actually a finding in itself. So I think it's about how you now change the perspective of your thesis to fit your data, because your data should speak to your thesis. And ultimately, I think your supervisor can advise better, but your data is the most important aspect here. So make sure that your data is highlighted. And I'm assuming you're using qualitative methods. I'm assuming. So the themes that you're getting from your data should now speak back to your introduction, because your introduction will ultimately change anyway as you keep writing. So don't throw it all away, no, because there's something that's already being said in your thesis with the way your thesis, the way you're writing your thesis, or the way your data is coming out. So yeah, I'll say go back to your supervisor. I'm sure there's a way to change the perspective of your thesis.
Thank you so much. And now, Ellie, would you please keep your question in 30 seconds?
Thank you very much for the presentation, Dr. Samantha. I'm not very good in English, but I'll try to speak English. I'm Eli from Bukavu on DRC. I want to know what is the best way when we start with writing a paper? Should we start with a result, or we have to start with the insight so that the lesson could be fluent? I don't know if you can hear my question.
I think I partially heard it. He said, is it better to start with the results or the introduction? So it depends on how you like your style of writing. But personally, I always start with my introduction. Because for me, it sets the context of the thesis. And then once I've written my question and my problem statement, I then go into my literature review. What is being said? And then my results section is usually the third section that I start to write the results, because then I start to see, okay, what is my results saying? And then once my results have spoken, because I use qualitative methodologies, ethnographic methodologies to be exact. Once my data has spoken, then I can start to change things around to say, okay, I need to negotiate, navigate this a bit better or differently. And I always seek the counsel of my supervisor. Because obviously they know my topic better than, or they know my topic as much as I do, and they have better experience. So always seek advice from your supervisor. Sorry.
We have learned on how to write a paper. Now we're going to talk about how do you communicate it. Our second speaker this afternoon is Emily Tyler. She is the founder of Communicating Conservation Organization, and Emily is the master of scientific translation. She translates complex environmental data into high-impact campaigns that spark real-world behavior change. Her work experience, I would say, is as odd as most of you students here. She has huge experience of years. Yeah, and with these few words, I would like to welcome Emily on the screen. Emily, the screen is all yours. We are so excited to hear from you.
Thank you. That's quite an intro. I don't know. I don't know if I would say all of those things, but thank you. Speaking of AI, but first, just an intro. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope I don't totally confuse you now, because what I'm about to talk about, you'll have to do the opposite of what Samantha covered so beautifully to translate it. But my name is Emily, as Sarah said. I'm very happy to be here today. I haven't given a webinar in a few years because I stopped working for an organization and have been consulting. So I might be a bit rusty. Please forgive me if I am. So being a consultant, I work with a few different conservation organizations, but I work part-time for the African Wildlife Economy Institute, and I'll be using examples from my work with them today and from other people that write for them. So this image, you might be able to tell, was obviously my attempt at asking AI to play around with my pun on anatomy of a message, because I know many of you are biology and science students. So I thought that would be a good way to break it down. But I have no idea where some of what's in this image comes from. What's quite scary is that this is the second attempt. The first one had dissection and all sorts of things. And what I really asked for the second time was what you can kind of barely see in the background there is the word message. And within that is sort of all the things like fact. It's also an example of what happens when you do try to use AI. But and clearly it has more of a sense of humor than we give it credit for. But over the next sort of little while, I'm just going to look at what actually happens when a piece of research leaves the lab and tries to make it in the real world. And I want to try and make this as practical as possible. So throughout the session, I'll be working through a kind of a single running example, which is a fictional study, to show you how these principles play out in practice. But first, and yes, another AI generated image, and it's also a little strange, but it's the last slide with these strange little creatures. I'm not sure what they are, but it's actually done a really good job of the concept, showing the things that get in the way are, it's not just jargon and paywalls and things like that, but it's also, not really understanding each other and not, placing our stories in different formats for different audiences. And so, scientists are trained to write for other scientists, but those who need to act on your findings often don't speak the language. So the science exists, but the bridge is missing. And more than this, a 2019 study found that fewer than 40% of peer-reviewed environmental studies are ever covered by the media. And you can imagine how devastating that is, but also you lose the important findings that are out there. So this is the gap that science communication exists to close, and the world is, full of important research that never gets beyond the pages published in. So by the end of the session, hopefully you'll have a bit of a practical framework for taking any piece of scientific work and shaping it into content that reaches and resonates with audiences beyond academia. That's the impact gap. So the example I'll be using is, imagine you have published a peer-reviewed study finding that vultures on communal lands reduce livestock disease costs by up to 40% by clearing carcasses before the pathogens can spread. It's real, it's significant, it has policy implications, but now what? So that's the question I'll sort of try to answer slide by slide. The first thing you have to do before writing anything is think about who this is for. So with your academic papers, this is for examiners and for other researchers and other academics, but obviously it's different depending on who your audience is. So, and it's the same finding, but it'll mean different things to, for example, a vet, a farmer, a journalist, and a policymaker. So you have to ask kind of, what do they already know? What do they care about? Which is a little bit trickier than the others. And what do they need to do with this information? So, for example, with our vulture study, vets will need to understand the disease suppression mechanism, which is generally still on the academic side. A communal farmer in Limpopo will need to know how it can save him money, or even that it can save him money to have vultures on his property. And then a journalist would need a hook, something like nature's cleanup crew are quietly saving farmers thousands, something like that. And then a policymaker needs to know what it means for land use decisions. So it's the same finding, but in 4 completely different messages and in 4 different kind of shapes. So there we go. So the content ecosystem. This is the kind of journey that research can take to reach different audiences when it's communicated well. So it'll start with the peer-reviewed paper. From there, it can become a sort of a policy brief or a technical report, which is a shorter document that's structured differently and aimed at decision makers. And we'll go into a bit more detail just now. And then you have a website article or an article in a magazine that's not sort of peer reviewed, it's not academic, it's more accessible to a broader but still quite informed audience. And then you'll get to sort of newsletters and social media, which are generally even broader audience that doesn't necessarily have any familiarity with the jargon and the topic itself and that sort of thing. But it's still important for them to know what it all means. So our vulture study sits right at the start of this journey. By the end of the session, we'll have moved it kind of all the way to the end. So just to look at sort of some of the platforms where science travels along this journey. And you've got your website articles, as I spoke about. The LinkedIn, just to break social media down a little bit, is more, well, it's becoming less sort of professional networking, that sort of thing. It's now a lot more people are coming on LinkedIn, a lot of students, that sort of thing. So it's kind of much broader than it used to be, but it used to just kind of be decision makers, executives, policymakers. So it was very important for it to be impactful and grab people at the start. Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter, is shorter, sharper, more visual, and more story-led. So you'll need to kind of tell a bit more of a story to keep people interested. And then, of course, conference posters, which will actually be before of those. Those are where you go and do in-person presentations for academic audiences. So we'll look at a little bit of, how those work. But first, just what makes a message land. So 4 really important principles are plain language. And the kind of rule we go by when we're writing things like website content or articles for public consumption or for, a less specialized website is if a 16-year-old can't understand your first paragraph, you have to rewrite it. And that actually goes for most of the text. Then the second thing is a very clear so what. So every piece of communication needs to answer the reader's silent questions, which is, why does this matter to me? And third, a local or human hook. Numbers are quite forgettable, but people and places are not. And fourth is the right format for the right platform will reach the right audience. You can't use a 1,200 word op-ed on Instagram or a 3-line caption as a policy brief. So, applying all 4 to our vulture finding, meaning plain language would be, so no jargon around carcass removal. The so what would be, the farmers save money, vultures deserve protection. Or not even, if you're persuading farmers that don't particularly like vultures, you wouldn't use that vultures deserve protection. You would keep it at, they save you money. They're better for your livestock. And then if you're angling at more of a kind of a policy, you would use both, because some policymakers will lean towards the eco-friendly and the conservation-minded, and some will just care about, saving landowners money. And then, you use that human hook. So you talk about a communal farmer in the Lowveld lost 3 cattle to anthrax last season. That's the right format for a short web article with a striking aerial photograph of a vulture or a vulture colony, something like that. So I just show this for contrast, because I know you've heard this in detail by someone much more qualified at it than me. It took me 5 years to write my master's, but that was because I was working full time. And so I've probably forgotten. So please forgive me if this is wrong. But it's the premise. The reason I'm showing it to you is show you the contrast. And just from a broad level, this starts, sorry, as Samantha said, with your introduction, with your objective, your methods, and then it'll get to the results. But the structure is not arbitrary. It's not random. It's a contract with the reader. The problem is that this contract only works with readers who already speak that language. Everyone else is not interested in the methods as much as the result. And therefore, they kind of look at the abstract and they bounce off before getting to the results, and therefore lose the context and the meat of it. So you have to translate it. So looking at a conference poster as well, just the layout, you'll lead with the number, the title with the number in plain English, and it has to be readable from across the room. It has to be something that will earn at least one person to stop walking and read it. Conferences are so busy. A lot of the time, all you see are posters that are filled with tiny text, and it's quite difficult to sort of read it all while people are jostling around. And so you have to make sure that people can read it, can know what it's about immediately, so that they come and read about it further. So, and the layout compounds the problem of that wall of methods that answers the how before the reader has decided that they care about the what. So, show immediately the result. That's the what. It'll grab the reader. And this works for a lot of things throughout, but, this must be a very clear layout as you read naturally from left to right. And, don't put everything in it. Have a QR code that people can scan, and then especially the reference list. Look, some people will obviously want to know where the references are from, but they can very easily scan that on their phone and see the reference list. It just leaves more room for people to actually want to engage with the poster in the first place. So, and then a policy brief. So again, this is a mix-up of the anatomy, so to speak. This is what happens when we rewrite the same study for a different reader. So a director of policy, a government official, somebody who makes decisions but doesn't read journal articles. May have a scientific background, or they may not be a scientist at all, be from the humanities, and that's a very different ballgame. I know because I'm from both, so it's very difficult transitioning between the two. So the structure shifts completely. We lead again with the findings, not the background. Frame the problem in the reader's terms. Livestock costs. That's what you're going to lead with. Capitalizing on nature's cleanup crew. Vulture conservation as a livestock disease management strategy. Boom. That's not only economic, that's health. That's, all of it in one. It's giving the policy maker the same study. The science hasn't changed. The reader has. And so the findings: vultures on communal lands reduce livestock disease costs by up to 40%. The problem, you then remind them what the problem is. Livestock disease is a high cost for communal farmers, but a natural cost-free solution is already present. The evidence, then you very clearly and very succinctly show how the findings solve the problem. The 5-year study across 42 units found 40% lower disease incidence where vultures are resident. That's it. You just need to show them that that's what the evidence shows. And then what this means for policy. Vulture conservation should be incorporated into livestock disease management frameworks. So the recommended action would be for the Departments of Agriculture and Environment to jointly develop guidelines recognizing vultures as disease control agents and, worth protecting. Then a website article. So a website article is kind of the anchor of a communication strategy once you leave the science side of the bridge, because this is where a lot of your knowledge will live. This is what's going to be searchable via Google and what can be linked to from anywhere. It's designed to inform, not necessarily to entertain, though it should still be very engaging. It is written for an informed, curious, non-specialist reader or specialist. Sometimes the specialists also want to just let their brain relax and read something a little bit more English than academic. Nothing wrong with academic, just, yeah. So the headline leads with a surprising benefit. It doesn't lead with the study. It's, vultures could be saving thousands of rands for communal farmers. Again, the opening paragraph puts the reader inside the scene before introducing any data. The findings are stated plainly, no jargon, no methods, just the number and what it means. And the why it matters section, which connects the science to the lived experience, to the everyday. And this is where you can start telling your story. And how you would start telling your story is about a farmer in the Lowveld and his experiences, and I always give my clients sort of questions to guide their storytelling when they send content back to me. How were you feeling when you were there? What did you smell? Just to put them in the situation, so when you talk about it all, you really make them feel like they understand what it is to be that farmer and to lose these cattle and what that means for his family and, how this can help. And I know it has multiple, aspects to it. I know that there will always be sort of cultural issues with it, and you've got to try and account for all of that in these storytellings, but also just make sure that it's objective. It's always objective and why it matters to the lived experience. So acknowledging the kind of the human in it, but keeping it factual. So notice that the opening doesn't start with researchers have found. That's more like a press release opening or something like that. This is much more centered around the farmer, not the scientist. Then looking at things like LinkedIn. Again, it's also evidence-led, analytical tone. It's short, 150 to 200 words. It goes from finding to the mechanism, policy implications, and a link to more, which is to the website. And then you can generally have a nice graphic that kind of brings the reader in a little bit, shows them the findings or the results of the tests, but not in just plain graph form, things like that. It's more about the integrated, this can be integrated into One Health, which is a kind of a field of study and practice that connects animal health to human health to environmental health. So it's all One Health. So this is now shifting the lens. And that's kind of the take that we're going to have with the LinkedIn post. Still leads with the finding, still moves through those things, but no emojis. They undermine the credibility signal in people's minds. Can have a few hashtags, but professional, minimal, and really just points to the why it works. The structure is almost journalistic in a way. It's what happened, why it matters, and what it means. Then we go to a little bit more informal, conversational. This is the Facebook posts. Instagram, you can also do a little bit of this, but generally try and keep it to far less words. I generally don't use Instagram for this kind of thing because you do need to say more, and it's just kind of not where you get the interest necessarily. But that being said, when there are kind of stories behind it where we actually do have an individual who experiences this, and then we can bring in just through telling the story through pictures, and that's where Instagram can come in. But in an academic setting, like in the Wildlife Economy Institute, we kind of tend to stick to the platforms where there's more scientific interest and more interest in the wildlife economy, and where we need to talk a little bit more than we show. But yeah, so this one is really you've got to hook people immediately. Did you know that vultures might be saving communal farmers thousands of rands a year? People are going to stop and go, huh? How are they doing that? How on earth could vultures be saving farmers money? So that's how it goes. And then, you can use one emoji, but it has to be functional. They look quite cluttered otherwise on Facebook. And this is, of course, when we're talking about this kind of content. If you're talking about other content, obviously this changes a little. It becomes less structured and less, you can use more emojis and more diagrams and things like that. And then again, this all links back to the website article. And I'll show you a case study shortly where you'll kind of see the progression. And then this is for X. So obviously, with X, you've got under 280 characters, which is very, very little when you're trying to write your results and things like that. So a lot of the time we will put something, that image is a bit funny too. I don't know if you would put it quite like that, but this was just to show, to demonstrate a point. But X is the fastest, sharpest, and it's often, it's always been the most opinionated of the four platforms. So its readers are everyone, researchers, journalists, policy people, and they want to scroll through quickly and respond to strong points of view. The passive voice is, as they say, death on X. You must always use active voice and short sentences. This post leads with the finding as a news bulletin, moves to the mechanism, and closes with an editorial kicker. The conservation case just got a RAND sign attached to it. That's something that's going to say what now? And that line is doing a lot of work. It signals a perspective, not just a finding. It's 2 hashtags minimum. X's algorithm penalizes hashtag heavy posts, and they make you look like you're trying too hard because you're trying to reach as many people as you can, because you're just putting all these hashtags so it'll appear in their feed. And notice that across all of the platforms, the finding never changed. The voice, length, framing, and the register changed. And the kinds of images. You wouldn't put that on LinkedIn. You wouldn't put that on a policy brief. So yeah, it's just that's what changes, is the pitch and the voice and the length and the shape, like we talked about earlier. So here's on our way, which is the Wildlife Economy Institute's website, we translate so this is a case study on wild meat. And what I've done here is, it's not from just one academic paper, what I've used here, but what we call sort of policy clusters. And one of them is wild meat. And so this is a few different papers and a couple of more less academic research projects kind of put together, but it's all one thread talking about the benefit of wild meat for not just the wildlife economy, but for the general economy as a whole. So the initial kind of academic paper was Driving Triple Bottom Line Value, Networks and Impacts in South Africa's Emerging Game Meat Industry. So, I mean, at first glance, that can be a little bit like you kind of have to say, sorry, what? Or, it's not very clear immediately to the non-scientific or the non-economic, because you can tell that an economist wrote this paper. No, I'm joking. But yeah, so what we do is we'll take that research paper, we publish it on our website, with a link to the original publication. But then we write a short kind of article as well to go with it on our website as a kind of just a little bit less formal, less academic, around 500 words. The very first paragraph states the key finding. The following paragraphs explain the context, the methodology, and the implications for policy and practice. And then we end with a link back to the original researcher. So Ndlovu and colleagues published on networks and impacts in South Africa's emerging game meat industry. The results demystified game meat value creation processes and highlighted business opportunities for full streamlined participation in the game meat sector. Even that's quite a mouthful. But alongside that paper, we produced a couple of companion policy brief, which took the results of this paper and put it into a format that policymakers could read it and could understand it and understand the implications for policy and practice. We then you can see on the bottom there is parts of the LinkedIn carousel post we did. It's not the whole thing because that one was particularly long, but it was actually one of the most reposts of our posts, reposted. That was what I was trying to think of. So, but here you can see we start with why it matters. Very clear. Game meat offers a pathway to conservation, food security, and livelihoods. And that's the triple bottom line. It's the conservation, the food security, and the livelihoods. And we go into this a little bit more in the next slide, where we talk about it's the environmental, habitat restoration, and biodiversity protection. Game meat is generally comes from game farms, which, if you're in conservation, you know that in South Africa, without private and communal game farms, a lot of species would no longer be with us. And a lot of the conservation space that we have is a result of game ranches. And it took me a long time to reconcile that, because I came from the very hard kind of anti-hunting. But I still don't necessarily want to see hunting happen and that sort of thing. But it's inescapable that the ranching sector has contributed to conservation and continues to do so. And so this is looking at how game meat industry offers a pathway to conservation, and it provides nutrition, empowerment, cultural preservation, jobs, entrepreneurship, and value-added products. But then looking also acknowledging the persistent inequalities. Despite the growth, 70% of game ranches remain white-owned, while many rural communities are excluded from high-value activities. Transforming ownership is key to inclusive impact. So that's another key point for policymakers to acknowledge. And then the key insight is that systems thinking is required. So basically what this paper is driving is that balancing environmental, economic, and social goals requires collaboration across networks and policies, and the industry's future lies in linking sustainability with equity in the sector. And the next case study will echo that as well. But just looking at the top is the ex post that we did. So instantly it starts with a question, but who really benefits? And so, yes, the study reveals how value is generated and how historical inequalities affect who benefits. So systems thinking is required for inclusive growth, and read the paper. And so we basically just put the key points on a graphic. So it pops up, you can see it. It's, got game in the background. People always appreciate wildlife, so we often use them as a background for they're part of it as well, but still. And then, a bit later a bit earlier, we did this from poachers to providers. Can Africa's wild meat market save wildlife? So that's about bringing the wild meat market into the sector as well. Have you ever considered how wild meat could be more than just a cultural staple, but also a key player in sustainable development in South Africa? And that's a website article. So that's the excerpt that will come up on Google. That's an interesting thing that, wow, okay, so it's a new way of thinking for many. And that's how we grab them, so to speak, on Google. So then the next one is another journal article published by some of our associates called Unlocking Opportunities for Meaningful Participation of Land Reform Beneficiaries in the Wildlife Economy. So again, this is centered around inclusive growth of the sector. Has the wildlife ranching sector been transformed at all? How do we unlock opportunities for land reform beneficiaries to enter the wildlife economy? Because agriculture is often not as cost effective or as easy, or it's so varied, but this is another way to benefit land reform beneficiaries who potentially haven't been successful in agriculture, conventional agriculture. And it's unlocking these opportunities, but it's really how. So we did the academic paper, then we did a website article with accompanying posts. You can see here, this one is the LinkedIn article. Similarly, we did another kind of slideshow, carousels with these images. And then here is the policy brief. So this journey was done particularly well because not only did it go through all of these phases, with, infographics on social media. It also then got picked up by the media, and there were articles in The Conversation, which is somewhere that a lot of our work, gets published in. And there was various interviews with the authors, and it had quite a big splash. So that's always really important for policy implications. Well, for reaching policy makers, is the amount of kind of hype around it in general, and how you've how much attention is on it, because that's kind of pressure from the public, which always helps when we're trying to affect policy. So I just wanted to kind of ask you guys to think about like a finding from your own research, or even from something you would one day want to research, and you can kind of make up a finding, and then maybe something that surprised you that you read, or that you wish more people knew about. And then I want you to say it twice. Once to a policymaker, in 2 sentences, no jargon, with a clear implication. And then once to a curious friend who's never read a scientific paper in their life. So looking at our vulture example, for a policymaker, we would say vultures provide a measurable disease control service that benefits communal farmers. Protecting vulture populations is therefore a livestock management decision, not just a conservation one. And to a curious friend, vultures are basically free pest control, where wherever they're present, farmers lose fewer animals to disease, and most people have no idea. And that's it. The same fact, but 2 completely different sentences, 2 completely different shapes. So just something for you to play around with, not necessarily now, but just to think about how you would, maybe the next academic paper you read, think about how you would say, give it a title if it was a website article, how you would draw people in on social media, and then, yes, how you would put it to a policymaker, and then to a friend who knows nothing about science or conservation or economics or anything. And then, so just the key takeaways are that here, unlike with your academic paper, you always start with your audience. So this is the anatomy of a message, the core framework. The audience is always where you start. Who are you talking to? Because that's going to affect everything else. Then your core message, and that's constant, but your framing is not. So the message is always going to be the same. It's the same findings, it's the same implications, it's the same way forward, but the way you frame it is different. And so you need to learn to translate it without distorting the findings, without losing very kind of important facts, or without kind of changing the messaging in a kind of a broken telephone way that somehow shifts the facts a little bit, and people kind of get them wrong. So that is something we have to be very careful about, is when we try and simplify the findings, we may end up simplifying them so much that they no longer mean the same thing. And that's a very big risk that we have to deal with. But so one study can become 5 pieces of communication tailored to their audiences and platforms. So it's that key nexus in the middle that you need to find for each of those framings. So, and you can go and have a look at the website for the Wildlife Economy Institute is wildlifeeconomy.info. And you can go on there and have a look at the different kind of outputs we put out. We have articles, we have research, we have briefs, and we have resources, which are when they're transformed into something more practical for implementing the policy themselves, and things like that. So this next part was my second attempt at my AI thing, and I thought I'd just show it to you because while some of it still doesn't quite make sense, it gives a good picture of what is at the root of your message. So there's always at the root of everything is the data and the findings, but the audience is central to how that's framed. So and the rest goes a bit pear-shaped because it doesn't really make sense in its entirety, but you can kind of think about the narrative and the framing and the illustrations as sort of part of the leaves or whatever. But apart from that, it gives you a kind of an idea of, okay, so you split off and you think about what formats you have, you think about what the audience insights you want to create, and then you think about the narrative and the imagery you can use to tell the story, to turn it into the shape you want it to be in. Yeah. So that's everything from me.
Emily, I should say I'm really impressed on how you have come to know on how to use each and platform. That's really impressive. Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing with us this vast information. And one thing that caught my attention is how you emphasize on knowing your audience. Just like Samantha said, that it's important you know your audience, and your introduction, it needs to make sense to a 16-year-old for you to know that you've done a good job. That one, I'm keeping it. Yeah, and like you said, you need to connect with your audience as soon as possible. When you were talking about Facebook, and that reminded what one of my friends said, that within 15 seconds, he said this formula, that a formula is within 15 seconds of communicating with your audience, you should be able to connect with them. They should be able to be interested in what you're going to tell them or on what you've written. So yeah, thank you so much. One thing that I struggle with, Emily, is confidence. Now I'm curious because I know some of the students, some of the people that we have online, they have the talent when it comes to story writing and writing things on social media, but then they're not confident enough to start it because they feel like it's not good enough. Maybe people will not like it, and they keep on like keeping stuff without posting them. So what would you say about how do you overcome, because you also had your start? How was your start, and how did you overcome, if you ever had this stage where you don't feel confident? How can someone overcome that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I tell you, sometimes I still have that problem. But what it comes down to is if you know your content is right, if you know that what you're saying is factually correct and you're representing it in the way that you want it to be received. So, and make sure that you're not being disrespectful towards anybody, you're not appropriating, you're not doing any of that. It's an inclusive, so it depends on what your objective is, but either it's, as long as it's kind of factual, but try and make it your own and in your own language, and that you're not going to offend anyone, or that you're twisting the facts to be something they're not. But again, it's all also practice. It's just like your scientific paper. All of this is practice, practice, practice. And I mean, I even still confer with somebody else often before I post, especially if it's on a paper or something like that. I'll send it to the author and say, is this correct? don't tell me how to say it, because they often don't understand, but are the facts correctly represented? And, and maybe that's what you can do, is you can just ask a friend or ask somebody else who's read the paper or, done whatever you're talking about before, and say, what do you think about this, for the first few times, until you kind of get that confidence up.